What would you do if the stories you grew up with, the tales whispered by elders, meant to keep you from wandering too far, suddenly came to life? What if the shadows in the forest weren't just shadows, and the myths weren't merely figments of imagination, but warnings passed down through generations? In the sleepy town of Daraga, nestled beneath the verdant hills of Howl, legends live just beneath the surface. Every corner seems to hold a story, every path a whispered caution. The elders speak of the Asbo, a creature of sinew and shadow, prowling the dense forests that fringe the town. They say it's a guardian of balance, feared and revered in equal measure, with claws sharp enough to rend stone and eyes like molten silver that burn with ancient rage. But what happens when curiosity overrides caution? Miguel and his 3 closest friends were never ones to heed the warnings. To them, the Asbo was more than a tale of terror. It was a challenge, a dare. A chance to unravel the mysteries of their town and make a story of their own. But as they set off on a journey fueled by adventure, they found themselves stumbling into a truth far darker than they could have imagined. Would their courage be enough to face what awaited them in the shadows? Or would their youthful defiance cost them everything? This is the tale of the Asbo, a story of friendship, folklore, and the thin line between myth and reality. Stay tuned as we uncover the events that forever changed 4 lives and redefined the boundaries of their world. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Now let's get started. The Howl of the Asbo. When legends awaken, courage is tested, and the line between myth and reality blurs. Daraga, a sleepy coastal town cradled by the verdant hills of Howl, seemed suspended in time. A place where the lines between the tangible and the mythical blurred. Each evening a dense, ghostly mist descended from the hills, veiling the town in an otherworldly hush. It carried with it the echoes of ancient tales, whispered by the elders. Asbo, a formidable creature who is said to prowl the region's untamed forests. They are no ordinary beasts of legend. It was a towering figure of sinew and shadow, its body wrapped in a pelt as dark as the depths of a moonless night. Its claws, long and wicked, gleamed with the promise of power, sharp enough to rend even the sturdiest stone. But it was the eyes of the Asbo that struck the deepest chord of fear and awe, molten silver orbs that seemed to burn with the weight of an ancient, knowing rage. To the townsfolk, the Asbo was not merely a monster conjured by the imagination. It was a guardian, a force of nature that upheld a fragile equilibrium in the wilds. Its existence, whispered of in cautious tones, was a reminder of boundaries best left unbroken and a natural order that no human should dare disturb. To Miguel and his 3 closest friends, the legend of the Asbo was less a tale of terror and more a thrilling backdrop to their youthful adventures. Miguel, with his effortless charm and devil-may-care grin, thrived on the rush of pushing boundaries. The leader of their group, he was a magnet for trouble, always daring to tread where others would not. Lila, pragmatic and sharp-tongued, often played the voice of reason, though her sharp mind masked a secret hunger for answers to the mysteries that surrounded them. She would roll her eyes at Miguel's bravado, but could never resist the allure of an unanswered question, especially one steeped in local lore. Ricky was the group's intrepid pathfinder, a boy with dirt under his nails and a knack for reading the wilderness like a map. He could spot an animal trail with a single glance and seemed to communicate with the forest in ways the others couldn't quite grasp. It was his steady hand that often led them through the gnarled trees and winding paths that others feared to tread. And then there was Arlene, the quietest of the four, but perhaps the most enigmatic. With an almost preternatural calm, she would sit under the great acacia tree by the town square, devouring books and listening intently to the elders' stories. Her memory was a vault of local legends, her soft voice often recounting details the others had overlooked or forgotten. Together, they were a band of misfits who thrived on the thrill of exploring the unknown. To them, the Asbo was less a monster lurking in the shadows, and more a tantalizing piece of their town's identity. A challenge waiting to be unraveled. One heavy, humid evening, as the friends gathered along the mangrove-lined shores of Daraga, Ricky pulled something from his bag that would alter the course of their lives. An aged, water-stained map. The fragile parchment, frayed at the edges, depicted a trail winding deep into the mountains and marked with a symbol that sent a chill through the group. A rough, ominous sigil etched in faded ink. "This belonged to my grandfather," Ricky said, his voice low but steady. "He always said it led to the cave of the Asbo." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the legend. For a moment no one spoke. The rhythmic clapping of the waves and the distant hum of cicadas filled the silence. Finally, Arlene's soft voice broke through. "If this map really leads to their lair," she said, her tone reverent, "then it's not just a cave. It's sacred ground." Miguel leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with unrestrained excitement. "Then we have to find it." Lila groaned, rubbing her temples in frustration. "Do you hear yourself? This is reckless, pure madness. And besides, the Asbo stories are just that. Stories." Miguel's grin widened, his confidence unshaken. "Only one way to find out." Ricky and Arlene exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of doubt and intrigue. Lila's skepticism was written all over her face, but even she couldn't fully extinguish the flicker of curiosity sparked by the map. By the time the group dispersed that evening, the decision had been made. Despite Lila's protests, the allure of uncovering the truth behind the legend proved irresistible. At first light the next morning, they gathered once more, their backpacks brimming with supplies, flashlights, ropes, water bottles, a single well-worn compass, and the ashes from a tree struck by lightning given by Ricky's grandfather. It was said to possess the power to defeat any Aswang. The air crackled with anticipation as they studied the map one last time before stepping onto the uncharted trail. The forest loomed ahead, dense and shadowed, the path before them obscured by overgrowth and mystery. As they ventured forward, nerves taut and hearts pounding, none of them could fully shake the feeling that they were walking into the unknown, toward a truth far greater and far darker than any of them could imagine. The journey began with an almost deceptive calm. The rhythmic chirping of cicadas blending with the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by a faint breeze. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the greenery, dappling the trail with patches of golden light. But as the group ventured deeper, the path grew more treacherous, narrowing and twisting as if it resisted their passage. Towering trees soon formed an unbroken canopy above them, plunging the forest into an otherworldly twilight. The sunlight that had guided them vanished, replaced by a dim, green-tinged glow. The air grew thick and damp, heavy with the mingled scents of moss, damp earth, and the faint metallic tang of decay. Arlene, ever observant, led the way with quiet determination, her eyes scanning their surroundings. She paused occasionally, gesturing toward symbols carved into the trunks of ancient trees, spirals, lines, and shapes that seemed to twist unnaturally. "These marks," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the whispering leaves, "are warnings. They're meant to keep people away." Miguel, walking just behind her, let out a scoff, though his grin was a shade tighter than usual. "Or scare them off," he replied, his bravado unwavering. Yet, even he couldn't completely ignore the growing unease settling over the group. The forest had grown quieter. The symphony of insect songs and bird calls had faded, replaced by unnerving sounds, branches snapping in the distance, the soft rustle of movement just beyond their line of sight. And every so often, a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Lila, her jaw set in a tense line, broke the silence. "It's just animals," she said, though her words sounded more like a mantra than an assurance. "Big animals," Ricky muttered, his eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. He adjusted the straps of his backpack, the weight of their journey pressing more heavily with each step. As the group pressed on, the forest seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavier, the sounds more alien. Every crack of a branch and rustle of leaves felt deliberate, as if the forest itself was watching and waiting. By late afternoon, they arrived at the spot marked on the map. Looming before them was the cave, its entrance a jagged maw of stone that seemed to breathe darkness. Cold air seeped from within, carrying an acrid, metallic scent that clung to their nostrils. Lila stopped a few paces from the entrance, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We should turn back," she said, her voice low but firm. "This doesn't feel right." Miguel turned to her, his flashlight already in hand, its beam cutting a swath of light through the encroaching shadows. "We're too close to quit now," he said, his voice laced with both excitement and impatience. Without waiting for a response, he stepped forward, his movements bold but deliberate. The others exchanged uneasy glances before reluctantly following. Their footsteps echoed against the slick, cold stone walls, amplifying the growing tension in the air. Inside, the cave was a twisting labyrinth, its corridors narrowing and widening unpredictably. The walls were etched with strange ancient symbols, patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the weak glow of their flashlights. Arlene paused to trace one of the carvings with her fingertips, her expression a mix of fascination and dread. Bones littered the ground, scattered haphazardly across the cavern floor. Some were unmistakably animal, gnarled and yellowed with age, but others defied easy classification. A spine here, a skull there, their shapes just human enough to send shivers down their spines. As they delved deeper, the temperature dropped further, and the oppressive silence of the cave was broken by guttural growls, low and resonant. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating in their chests like an unspoken threat. And then, just as the growls reached its peak, they appeared. From the depths of the shadows, a pack of Asbo emerged, their massive silhouettes breaking free from the shadows like predators stepping out of a nightmare. Their fur, sleek and dark as polished obsidian, shimmered faintly in the fractured light of the friends' flashlights. Eyes like molten silver burned through the darkness, each pair fixed on the intruders with an intensity that seemed to pierce their very souls. No one moved. The air was thick, heavy with the acrid scent of the cave and the palpable fear gripping the group. Time seemed to stretch painfully, each second pounding in their ears alongside their racing hearts. The largest of the pack, towering and menacing, stepped forward. Its movements were deliberate, each step echoing softly against the stone floor, its claws clicking faintly like the ticking of some macabre clock. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, reverberating through the cave and into their bones. Arlene's hand shook as she lowered her flashlight, the beam no longer illuminating the creature's face but leaving it veiled in shadow. Still, she held her ground, though every fiber of her being screamed at her to run. Slowly, she stepped forward, her footfall so soft it was almost imperceptible. "We mean no harm," she said, her voice quivering at first before she forced it steady. "We're only here to learn." The Asbo's head tilted slightly, its eyes narrowing as if considering her words, or her intent. It sniffed the air, a deep, wet inhale that made Miguel's pulse hammer in his throat. The creature's lips curled, revealing long, jagged teeth that gleamed in the faint light. A growl followed, deep and guttural, echoing through the cavern like the roar of distant thunder. Behind Arlene, Miguel shifted, his hand tightening on the flashlight as if preparing to use it as a weapon. Lila reached out instinctively, gripping his arm to stop him, her nails digging into his skin. "Don't," she hissed under her breath, her voice barely audible. The Asbo's growl deepened, a sound so primal it seemed to vibrate the very air. The other creatures in the pack mirrored it, their growls a symphony of menace. Ricky's breathing quickened, and he clutched the straps of his backpack as though they might anchor him to reality. The air seemed to thicken as one of the Asbo emerged from the shadows, its form half hidden but undeniably menacing. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment before the attack. Ricky's heart pounded in his chest, a deafening rhythm that drowned out all other sounds. He stood frozen, his limbs refusing to move, his mind grappling with the reality of the situation. Then, like a flash of lightning cutting through the dark, Ricky remembered the ashes in his bag. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind, steady and calm, as it had been on the countless nights they sat by the fire. "These ashes," his grandfather had said, holding the small pouch with reverence, "are no ordinary ashes. They are born of lightning's fury and earth's resilience, capable of repelling even the fiercest of a swang." Snapping out of his paralysis, Ricky's trembling hands fumbled with his bag. The Asbo crept closer, its glowing eyes locked onto him, its lips pulling back to reveal a maw of jagged teeth. Each step it took seemed to ripple with power, its claws flexing as though anticipating the strike. Finally, Ricky's fingers closed around the pouch. With a desperate resolve, he ripped it open, the faint smell of charred wood wafting into the tense air. The Asbo paused for a heartbeat, its expression shifting to wary curiosity. But before it could react further, Ricky flung the ashes toward the creature. The moment the ashes touched its skin, the effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The beast let out an ear-piercing howl, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath Ricky's feet. The Asbo recoiled violently, its once formidable form writhing in visible agony. Smoke rose from where the ashes had made contact, and the beast's flesh bubbled and sizzled as if seared by an unseen fire. The other Asbo started growling uncontrollably. Ricky stood there, panting, clutching the empty pouch as his knuckles whitened. The creature staggered back into the shadows, its haunting cries fading into the night. For a moment, the forest fell silent, save for Ricky's own ragged breaths. Then, as suddenly as the growl had begun, the lead Asbo fell silent. It tilted its head again, its silver eyes never leaving Ricky's. For what felt like an eternity, it stood there, unmoving. Then, to their astonishment, it gave a slow, deliberate nod. Without breaking eye contact, the creature turned and stalked back into the shadows. The rest of the pack followed, their hulking forms disappearing one by one until only silence and darkness remained. The friends stood rooted in place, their breaths shallow and uneven. The tension in the air lingered, a ghostly remnant of what had just transpired. Finally, Miguel let out a long exhale, breaking the silence. "What just happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ricky didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness where the creatures had vanished while holding the pouch his grandfather had given him. His thoughts a whirlwind of questions and unspoken fears. The cave was silent again. But the friends knew they had crossed into something far greater, and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The journey back to the town was a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. No one dared to speak as they walked through the empty streets, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. The once familiar roads felt alien, as if their ordeal had forever altered their perception of home. They finally stopped at the old plaza near the town center. The cool night air heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint aroma of roasted corn from a distant vendor's stall. They sank onto one of the weathered benches, their silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves from the towering acacia trees overhead. Miguel stared at the darkened facade of the barangay hall, his voice low and filled with uncertainty. Did that really happen? Arlene leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees as she stared at the ground. Her fingers traced idle patterns in the dirt as she nodded slowly. "They just let us go," she murmured. Then her gaze shifted to Ricky, and her eyes landed on the small pouch at his side. "Maybe it was because of that," she said, pointing at the bag. "They were afraid of it." Ricky glanced down at the pouch, his hand resting lightly on its worn fabric. He could still feel the faint energy of the ashes within, almost as if they were alive. Miguel turned to him, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You saved us, man," Miguel said, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you." Ricky shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "No," he said softly, his voice steady despite the chaos they'd just been through. "Grandpa saved us. He knew. He always knew." The group sat in silence again, the weight of his words settling over them like a heavy shroud. The town felt unnervingly quiet, as if it, too, was recovering from the unseen threat that had loomed over them just hours before. Lila hugged her knees to her chest, her face pale in the dim light. "I'm never doing this again," she whispered, her voice trembling. Miguel let out a weak chuckle, though it lacked his usual humor. "Yeah, that's probably for the best." He looked around at the others, his expression softening. "But we made it. Somehow we made it." Arlene glanced at the worn cobblestones beneath their feet, then up at the acacia trees swaying gently in the night breeze. "Maybe," she said quietly, her voice tinged with awe. "We're not supposed to understand it. Some things just aren't meant to be explained." Ricky leaned back against the bench, his mind wandering to his grandfather's stories, the warnings he'd once dismissed as the ramblings of an old man. Now, those tales felt like lifelines, fragments of wisdom that had saved them from an unimaginable fate. As the first light of dawn broke over the rooftops, painting the town in muted shades of gold and pink, they rose to their feet. Their steps were heavy but resolute. Though they were back in the familiar embrace of their town, nothing felt the same. The plaza, once a gathering place for festivals and laughter, now felt like a boundary, marking the thin, fragile line between the ordinary world they thought they knew and the terrifying unknown that lurked just beyond it. From that day forward, the four friends carried their experience like an unspoken pact, a secret thread that wove their lives together in ways no one else could understand. The encounter with the Asbo had carved a deep mark in their hearts, a scar of fear, awe, and something neither of them could quite name. They never spoke of that night to anyone else. How could they? Who would believe the story of creatures half hidden in shadow, of magic passed down through generations, and of danger that had brushed so close it still made their skin crawl, even among themselves? The subject rarely came up, as if saying too much might summon those glowing eyes and twisted forms back into their lives. The forest, once a playground for dares and harmless adventures, had become something else entirely. Its towering trees and thick underbrush now held a kind of sacredness, a quiet warning to those who might tread carelessly. They avoided it when they could. But on the rare occasions they had to pass its edges, they found themselves walking a little faster, their eyes darting to the shadows. Ricky, in particular, felt the weight of the experience differently. The pouch of ashes, now tucked safely in a drawer by his bedside, had become a reminder of his grandfather's wisdom and the power of the unseen. He would often sit on his bed, turning the pouch over in his hands, wondering about the stories his grandfather never had the chance to tell him. Was their town always haunted by such creatures? And if so, how many others had faced them before and lived to tell the tale? Arlene found herself drawn to books and old tales, poring over anything that might offer a glimpse into what they had encountered. The myths of their town, once just entertaining stories told during festivals, now felt like warnings whispered from another time. She would sometimes bring her discoveries to the group, sharing cryptic passages that hinted at things they dared not name aloud. Miguel, ever the skeptic turned reluctant believer, wrestled with the tension between logic and what they had seen. He tried to frame the encounter as a freak anomaly, a story he could tuck away and never revisit. But in quiet moments, when the hum of the town faded into stillness, he would find himself staring into the night, searching for answers he couldn't articulate. Lila, on the other hand, wanted nothing more than to forget. She avoided any mention of the forest and ignored the flicker of unease she felt in its direction. But even she couldn't escape the memories. At night, when the world was silent, she would wake suddenly, the echo of the Asbo's howls reverberating in her dreams. Despite their individual struggles, the four of them shared an unspoken understanding. It was as if their bond had been tempered in fire, strengthened by the shared terror of that night. They couldn't go back to who they were before. And perhaps they didn't want to. The experience had reshaped their view of the world, revealing layers of mystery they hadn't thought possible. The town, with its bustling markets and vibrant festivals, carried on as though nothing had changed. But for the four friends, everything was different. They saw the shadows as more than just the absence of light, heard the rustling of leaves as something more than the wind, and felt the weight of the unseen pressing against the edges of their reality. Respect the mysteries of the world. That was the lesson they had learned. Treat them with the caution and reverence they deserved. And perhaps, just perhaps, those mysteries might respect you back. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more tales like this. Your support means the world. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Kindly leave a comment below.